Welcome to another episode of Latinos Who Thrive. I am your host, Victor Escalante. Today we welcome special guest Liz Salazar Young, a licensed professional counselor with 36 years of experience in family and individual psychotherapy. Liz is a specialist to talk about the imposter syndrome and what you can do to overcome it. This is our second episode of a three-part series. Next week, we finish with a guest who has overcome the imposter syndrome. So let's get to it. Liz, welcome to Latinos Who Thrive.
Victor, I am excited to be here with you today.
I'm very excited to have you on as an expert in the imposter syndrome because this is going to be a three-part series that we started last week. And today, we turn to you as the expert in this subject. And then next week, we're going to follow it up with a woman that struggled with the imposter syndrome, and she was able to overcome it. So let's go ahead and get started with your perspective on this. Tell us from a clinical perspective, you being a psychotherapist, what is the imposter syndrome?
Well, basically, it's a psychological pattern where a person doubts their accomplishments and they have a pattern of persistent, often internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud or a phony. And they don't believe that their competence and their ability to have had success was due to their hard work, but that they were just lucky.
We suffer from phenomena of feeling that we don't belong here because we're not Anglo,
Exactly.
We're not blue-eyed, we don't have the right last name.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And guess what? It can affect any social status, work background, degree, or expertise. It doesn't matter.
I read the origins of who originated the imposter syndrome, and it turns out that it's a woman from back east. I don't remember whether it was in Kentucky or Tennessee, but she came from a poor background. She ended up earning her PhD in psychology. And even then, she didn't think that she belonged in academic circles. And so
And was she Latino?
No, she was Anglo.
Sorry.
She did extensive research, and what she discovered in teaming up with another psychologist was that they suffered from the same thing. And then they did a focus group, and then they discovered that everyone in the focus group suffered from imposter syndrome. So this is a very pervasive phenomena throughout our society. And I would go so far as to say that this is a worldwide phenomenon.
Most likely, yeah.
In your experience, Liz, talk to us about what, as a psychotherapist, do you think that women suffer more from this condition?
There was a study done in the 70s that indicated that it was more likely to happen to the ladies or women of color. So yes. Oh, and the other part of it was that they would be high achievers. The other thing that you were saying earlier, though, was that they were saying that 7 out of 10 adults have at least once in their life felt that they had that imposter syndrome.
Wow. So this is very pervasive.
Very.
In your experience, what are the causes of this debilitating personal limitation? Talk to us as a therapist. Put on your therapist hat. Tell us, what do you think is the cause?
Well, there's a couple of different things that I can think of right off the top of my head. It has to do with certain personality traits, I believe.
Okay.
And so this could come from especially people who have high expectations of themselves and that were also placed on them by their parents and stuff like that. So they tend to become the high achievers, right? And as high achievers, they also want to be people pleasers. So that's another thing that they have going on with them. In addition to that, because they're trying so hard, they need to have excessive control. They want to be in control. They also tend to be more anxious and have like hypervigilance. And then last but not least, just as an over umbrella view of it, is that they have a lot of self-talk, and they're called cognitive distortions that keep them from really seeing the world through a certain lens. Instead, it's always clouded with these cognitive distortions.
Yeah, that reminds me of the work of Virginia Satir and how she talked about the hero of the family and remember some of the roles that people take on in a dysfunctional family and how the hero tends to be the overachiever, generally associated with the firstborn, and how they have unrealistic expectations put upon them. And then they take on those unrealistic expectations and own them. And then they they don't really live a life of ease, a life of achievement, because they're never good enough.
That's right. You hit it right on the target.
And so they have to work extra hard, and they burn out many times because, again, they feel this deep hole inside that they can never fill.
And that they are failures, in fact, right?
Exactly. And the cognitive distortions, there we get into cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's something that you do in helping patients overcome some of that inner narrative that people carry on with them. So give us an example of some of those distortions that you help people with.
Well, the big one, I think, has to do with the should statements, how we criticize ourselves about what we should or shouldn't do, must or mustn't do, or what we have to do. These unrealistic expectations, So sometimes it has to, it's all or nothing thinking. There's no room for in the middle. It's all or nothing.
Right.
That's one.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's like a bunch of them, but I can rattle them off to you, or I can keep on giving you more examples.
Give us some more examples, because a lot of people are going to identify with some of these distortions and realize that, hey, I suffer from this.
Okay. Well, another one that's a biggie is the one that has to do with dwelling on the negatives and ignoring the positives. So that's, a lot of people do that. Sometimes they'll also have overgeneralization in their thinking, where they will view a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat, or something that is catastrophic. That's another one. They catastrophize a lot. Everything is worst. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen. They don't see this other side of it. And then I don't know if I mentioned this yet or not, but a lot of these people, I refer to clients, is that they have a tendency to have a lot of perfectionistic needs as part of that desire to have that being good enough and that positive self-worth and value that they feel that they don't have. So they tend to talk to themselves very negatively, the inner critic, and they talk to themselves about, I'm so stupid, I'm such a jerk, how could I not have known that? And they just put themselves down all the time. In their own head, they're their worst enemies. They're their worst critics.
Yeah,
their worst critics.
Absolutely. And I tell clients sometimes when I see this in them to check out who the voice is, because many times it's the mother's voice. This is not hating on parents, because again, they were trying to do the best they could with what they had, and sometimes they were victims themselves of abusive parents. Yeah, and so so they made mistakes that they ended up affecting their children, but their children never realized that had they been born into a different family, they wouldn't have that cruel judge that lives inside of them.
In their head, yeah. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right about that.
Because not only do they judge themselves, they also judge others, and they also judge situations in their life.
Absolutely. And you know what else is a very common thing for them? They worry a lot. They I already mentioned that they can be hypervigilant, but it's like they're always on that fight or flight, ready to jump on stuff,
Yes, absolutely. And that is very debilitating, because think of the stress that creates in people.
Yeah, and in their relationships.
Absolutely.
Because their expectations of others is also affected.
Very unrealistic, yeah. Okay. Can you give us some examples of cases that you've treated that at the root of what they suffered was the imposter syndrome?
Sure. I can think of a Hispanic female that was married to an Anglo man.
Okay.
And during her high school years and her middle school years, she was always a high achiever and did her best to excel. But at the same time, was never really recognized by her father as having been good at what she did. Right. So, and if she didn't do well, he had a tendency to punish her and make her feel that she wasn't good enough or that she was inferior and wrong, right? So on top of that, what happened to this Hispanic female was that when she was born in the years when if you spoke Spanish in class, you would be put under the desk or else hit with a swat or punished for speaking Spanish. So there was another thing that kicked in there where she felt that, so it's not okay to be Hispanic and to speak Spanish? So what she did is she turned off speaking Spanish and even at home, and she just would answer everything in English. And then as a result of that, with the father being so macho, he always made her feel like, okay, you're never going to amount to anything. You're just going to get married and have kids. So why should I support you to go to college? I'm not going to do it. And so what she did, because she had the ganas, is that she went ahead and worked 40 hours a week, and she went to school taking a full load.
Wow. What a cruel thing to do to your child.
But like you said, Victor, when you stop and think about where it came from, the root cause of it, it's a little bit more it's understandable, I guess you could say, about why that particular father did the things that he did. So my intervention, in case you're curious about what I did,
tell us what you did.
I tried to work with her on these cognitive distortions, because she had a bunch of them. And of course, a lot of them came from the way that the father would talk and what she would hear in the conversations that he was having. And she went ahead and I worked with her on outdating these belief systems and the programs that, she had been listening to forever, by reprogramming her, by having her listen to positive affirmations like while she slept or while she was driving, or just at any time she was cleaning the house, whatever, so that she was getting these new messages filtered through to her subconscious mind, so that she could start to recognize, hey, yeah, that's more real. That's more, that's a better perspective than this negative, half empty glass that I've been living from all this time, instead of half full.
Right. And that's where most of the problems lie, is in the unconscious programming that is running constantly in the background. That's where the judge, the inner judge, is going to criticize you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She really had a lot of anxiety because she was always striving to prove that she was good enough, And on top of that, because she felt like she was never getting there, she had what's called dysthymia, which is a very low-grade depression. It's not bad where you're crying all the time or anything like that. It's just you're not quite happy because you don't feel like, you're good enough. Your self-worth is down. Your self-esteem is down.
Sure. Liz, talk to us about some of the work. I know that you did this for years, maybe you still do, to where you do brain scans. Remember in your office?
Well, they weren't really brain scans. What I was doing is I was offering some biofeedback.
Biofeedback, exactly.
And biofeedback. And the biofeedback, at the time when I was doing it, was more so about measuring these physiological changes that were taking place in your body.
Okay.
Right? So when the person initially would walk in, I would do the, like the assessment, and I would find out where they're at, a baseline. And then from there, I would teach them various techniques in order for them to learn how to take charge of their life again, to take control of these physiological changes that were in their body and reduce the level of anxiety and tension and stress that they had going on, both physiologically and emotionally.
Right. So that's repatterning the brain, isn't it, to have a different response to the stressors in the environment?
Yes, and I heard you talk about the
neuroplasticity. Yes. So neuroplasticity is a new field of science, and I got introduced to it through a researcher here in Houston. That if listeners are interested in doing a deep dive into this, there's a book that I'll put in the show notes. It's called Live Wired by this author, that he has done extensive research on how the brain is constantly rewiring itself. But here's what I found fascinating is the amygdala will reprogram your mind and is constantly fighting you to reestablish the foundational programming, because that's what gives you continuity. That's what gives you your identity. And so unless you have the expertise to go in and reprogram your earliest programming in such a way that is ecological and in such a way that it updates your new identity, it is only that way that the change is permanent. Otherwise, you can do some superficial change work, and the amygdala is going to rewire the brain with all that negative self-talk and emotions, because again, the positive function is to preserve your identity.
Right. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that they teach is that whenever you take something out, you want to put something back
Exactly. Because the mind cannot deal with vacuums. The mind is always going to fill it with something.
Yeah, that's right on target. Yeah. So you want me to keep on telling you a little bit more about
tell
this
us some more examples, or tell us, do a deeper dive into this case, however you want to do it.
Well, you were talking about the father and how that was, and what he wound up doing is he placed excessive pressure on her, and she never did receive the accolades for her success in academics or later on in her life and her career, right? And then she had a husband that she married, and I already told you that he was an Anglo, and although he wasn't, he didn't put her down for succeeding. In her own mind, she had something similar to what the doctor that was on your other one said, and that was that he didn't necessarily praise her for her accomplishments. You know, it wasn't that he wasn't saying she couldn't do it. He just didn't say, "Hey, you keep going, baby. You keep doing it. You know, you're gonna succeed. I can see you there." He didn't do that. And then for herself, this was a sad part about what she shared with me. She shared that one year she made almost as much as he did, right? And she started taking more power and control in the relationships, where she went out and she bought her, the furniture that she wanted and decorated the way she wanted to. And she didn't even ask him for permission, which was typical of what a Hispanic female would do. She would concur with her husband, right? And then he seemed very sad and quiet. He didn't say anything, but she realized that she was kind of like demasculating him by having more prestige, I guess you could call it, because he in his own right had a very good job and everything, but it was still the idea that she rough time seeing herself as more successful than him, and somehow in her mind she made it wrong to earn more money. So guess what? She sabotaged herself for the rest of her career, never to make more money than he. To keep him happy, quote unquote, to keep him happy. But again, he didn't never say anything. I mean, they deposited the money in the bank together. So it wasn't like if she had her own chicken account or whatever. It wasn't. It was just the idea that she didn't want to demasculate him.
Yeah, but the irony is, like, it's so interesting to see how this imposter syndrome permeates our entire life, our relationships, our career, our work, basically everything. It's like you can't even enjoy on vacation your achievements or success. I read one time the famous author, Stephen King of horror books. After he had his first major success with his first book, he couldn't even enjoy that because he figured that his career was over. That now that he had his big hit, that he would never be able to do it again, and so he stressed trying to come up with his next big book. So.
And from there, I bet you anything, that's where the addictions of the alcohol came into
Absolutely.
place. Makes sense.
So you and I worked in the criminal justice system, and we work with a lot of offenders with chemical dependency problems. Look at how we saw a lot of this within that demographic.
Oh, yeah. It was very sad. And, like even those, like, for example, like they'd say some of the father or the mother or whatever, the people who are, putting them down, even though they might be deceased. Here's a very interesting part. They continue to impose upon themselves their own discipline, their own punishment for the mistakes that they might make, reminding themselves that they're not perfect.
The abuser lives within.
They're not good enough.
The abuser lives within.
The saboteur, they call it,
absolutely.
Right? The saboteur.
You are listening to Latinos Who Thrive with special guest Liz Salazar Young. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to take your business to the next level? Look no further than Escalante Training and Consulting. With our expert trainers and personalized approach, we can help you reach your business goals and succeed in today's competitive market. Whether you're looking to enhance your team's skills, increase your market share, or simply build a strong brand, Escalante Training and Consulting has the resources and expertise to help you succeed. So why wait? Invest in your future success today and experience the power of Escalante Training and Consulting. Call today at 713-992-8279 or visit them on the web at victorescalante.com. You will be glad you did.
We'll now return you to Latinos Who Thrive with special guest Liz Young.
Spread her wings and expand into other endeavors that she wanted to do, and that caused her to procrastinate to the point that somebody else took her idea and ran with it. And she never made the money that she could have made if she had gone ahead and just had that confidence in herself that she could have, grown her business in a different way.
Tell us this story has a good, happy ending.
But the good news was helping her. Yeah, well, I think it has a good ending because, she derived a lot of her satisfaction in her career from the work that she did and the help that she gave to those people that needed help, right? She was a service-oriented career. And she didn't really know how to play much. So one of the things I used as an intervention with her is I said, you know what, why don't you start letting a little bit more of your fun side come on? What kind of hobbies do you have? And she had a few, like she liked gardening and she definitely read, but her reading wasn't really about fun stuff. It was always stuff that had to do with improving herself, right? So what I had her do is I had her start doing some just simple little beadwork like the kids do, just making little bracelets and stuff. And in doing that, she found herself relaxing more. And she allowed her creativity to flow instead of stunting it. And to the point where she got pretty good at it. And she even was, doing some of those craft fairs, trying to sell her stuff and things like that. So I was happy for her.
That's good. I'm happy that this story had a happier ending.
Oh, the other intervention I had, Victor, in case you want to know, I also had her remind herself of all her achievements and over the years as the evidence that proved that she was in fact worthy and merited the success. It didn't come by luck. She had persistence. She worked hard, in school. Similar to what the other doctor said, it was so interesting how it mirrored, she would also record her lectures from school, and she would also listen to them any chance she got, just to sink it in a little bit deeper and just have that understanding.
Yes.
So she was always on trying to be better. Oh, and then you said something else that was really interesting that it piggybacks on the other one about the Catholic background.
Yes.
Okay, look at this part. So in the Catholic background that she had, it was just the beginning of her life, but that's all it counts, right? She had priests during the Mass back in the old days when she would go ahead and hear the priest impose the wrath of God for her sins, right? And this only made the matters worse because it stifled up her growth and for meaning in her life. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So my intervention on that one, I want to share. It's a cool one. Is that I drew her a little like a board, like a little target board, and then I would poke at it and say, okay, I told her this. I said, did you know that sinning, the word sin, means to miss the mark? And I said, so who do you know that can pick up a bow and arrow, and the first time they shoot out at the target, that they're going to hit a bullseye? Who do you know that can do that? Well, no, nobody. And I said, exactly. So every time you're practicing, you're getting better and better and better at doing what you want to try and do. Ultimately, hit the bullseye. Right. But it takes practice, and that's part of growth. And that's okay. You're not making mistakes. In actuality, you're just growing. Right. That's all.
And that did it? That worked pretty good for her?
That helped her. Yeah, that helped her shift her perspective. Yeah.
So listeners, remember, if somebody is ragging on you for being a bad person, consider the source. Consider who is telling you you're bad. Who is telling you you're incompetent? Because there's a lot of haters out there and they cannot see you succeed or be better than them. And so they have to put you down. There's even that twisted phenomena of having joy at seeing you fail. And so if you go around telling other people of how things are going bad, guess what? You're making them happy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to tell you also the other thing that was back to the root cause, an important thing to know, generational. It turns out that her father had, in fact, his own it's the imposter syndrome, where he masked it, though, by being a narcissist, right? And he never saw himself as good enough, since what had happened to him is that he had dropped out in high school at the age of 17 to marry his impregnated girlfriend. So in digging deeper, because I always do a really deep family history, I found out that his mother and the maternal grandfather were also disciplined taskmasters with no praise but disdain disdain for women being inferior to men, because she had a little bit of background in Native American.
Sure. And that's what we see in a lot of broken homes, is this is generational trauma that is just passed on from one generation to the other. In this final segment, Liz Young talks to me about a couple of cases that deal with promiscuity, and she asked me what could be the cause. So listen to my answer. Without knowing the complete history, I would say that promiscuity is a form of adventure and it's a form of a tremendous arousal. And there, what you're doing is you're activating the certain regions of the brain that are going to ameliorate the depression, the feelings of worthlessness. Because think about it, when you hook up with somebody and they like you, or you're looking forward to being with them, or they're looking forward to you being with them, there is a common bond. And so in that relationship or in that dynamic, it becomes a form of self-therapy. You and I know that there's some like over 25 different addictions. And if this is an addictive pattern, then it starts out as being a compulsion. Then it turns into an obsession. Then it turns into an addiction. And if the addiction is repeating, then that's a sign that the person is self-medicating.
Yes. And that reminds me of a book that I read that was excellent. It was called Women, Sex, and Addiction. And in that book, I learned that a lot of women, and I can imagine that this is very true for the Hispanic women as well, they use their sexuality as a way of gaining power over men, where they can seduce a man and feel that they are able to overcome that feeling of worthlessness or not being good enough by causing a man to fall to his knees, lusting after her or whatever it is. But it's that, or the tease of, I can make you do this much stuff, but just to the point that I'm comfortable with, and then I back off. So it's
a power dynamic. It's a totally abuse of power. I once had a client that he brought me his teenage daughter because they had been estranged all their life, and she came back into his life. Found out that he was overly critical and very controlling. And so when she came into her age of womanhood, she used that sexuality to try to control the father, to reverse the tables by being promiscuous. And again, had the father not been so controlling and prepared her, she wouldn't have gone down this path. But she used her sexuality in a form of reverse control over her father. And when they both came to that realization, they were able to experience a healing and forgiveness of each other's mistakes that they made. You would think that just because you're able to become a very outstanding leader in whatever field you're in, that's going to solve it, but it doesn't, does it?
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, so I kind of found that kind of sad.
I had a case years ago. You remind me of this other case I had years ago that this is an example of generational brokenness. He had a very successful engineering firm, and he did a lot of work. This is an El Paso case that he did a lot of maquila work in Juarez. He wanted his father to be happy for him and to be proud of him. But the only thing the father could say, well, the economy could turn and you could lose your business. Okay. It's like the father always had some criticism about him. Okay. Because in the father's mind, the only thing that was good was being in the army or being in the military or working for the railroad. And his other son worked for the railroad because, again, very, very stable industries that you're never going to be out of a job. But here's the kicker. The father, as a little boy, he starved because his father, my client's grandfather, was going to seminary school and he got sick. And what happened is he couldn't keep a job. And so the family went hungry many times. They were like 4 kids and they would always skip out in the middle of the night on landlords. So there was a lot of shame and there was a lot of scarcity, a lot of poverty. And so the father ended up getting into the military to help feed the family and to help support the family. But get this, the great grandfather of my client was the founding father of Harvard Business School.
What?
Yes.
Wow.
So it was that generation of his grandfather that created the problem that led to all this broken dysfunction. So what I had to do with this client is I had to go back to his great grandfather to get the things that his father could never give to him: the praise, the accolade, the all the positive affirmations that he was missing and that his father wasn't capable of. Because again, in his mind map, in his map of the world, he was never going to be able to approve of his son and all his accomplishments.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. But like you said, kind of sad.
But you and I know that if a person works at it, their story ends up having a happier ending.
Right. Yes.
So Liz, I know that no two cases are alike in your experience, but what seems to be the most effective therapy or treatment for imposter syndrome in your experience?
I really believe that it has to do with that reprogramming, with the idea of changing the mindset. So where it's not filtered through all these distorted cognitions, and changing the perspective of it, and doing it in an environment that's safe and non-judgmental, allowing that person to recognize that it's okay to have strengths and weaknesses, and that we're all here learning life lessons, and we're just taking it one day at a time, trying to do a little bit better each day, So, I would have to say that's probably, and maybe the other thing would be that not counting so much on external, what do they call it? External validation, but having it come more from within yourself, where the self-esteem is built up, where you can really look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm okay. I'm good just the way I am. I'm not perfect. I might not be perfect, but I'm learning. Every day I'm learning and experiencing new things. And each day I'm getting better and better at it from the lessons that I'm learning from the day before.
And something as simple as saying that in front of a mirror works wonders, doesn't it?
Yes.
Those
absolutely.
positive affirmations.
The law of attraction too.
Absolutely.
When you believe it and you can see it, then you can create it. Words are powerful creators.
This has been a very interesting conversation, and we got to have you back to talk about some more psychological issues, because you really bring a lot of experience into the conversation. How long have you been a therapist?
36 years.
That makes you an expert in my mind.
I'm glad you think
Liz,
so.
any final last words for our listeners?
Maybe for future generations, I would like to say one thing. Yeah. About breaking the pattern. We might not be able to go back and do too much fixing about what happened to our parents' generation or grandparents' generation, but I can say that we definitely have control over how we do for our kids, right? So focus in on, I'm sorry, I can use Spanish. Focus in on the idea about going ahead and encouraging our children to do their best. Not so much by doing false praises per se, but just focusing on the outcome, like asking them, did you do your best? And if they can say, yeah, I really did, okay, then you did your best. And what can you do about it? Like, let's say that it's a student that says, I was striving for an A, but I didn't get an A+. I didn't get 100. I got 98. And so my advice to it would be, okay, so you got 98. So what can you do about it? So that the next time that you take another test, that you can get a little bit closer to your goal of 100. And then I leave it up to them to recognize, well, yeah, I could have studied a little bit more, or I could have done this, or I could have done that. Okay, so then adjust the way that you're doing what you're doing so that you're able to accomplish what it is that you want, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I think you use that a lot too.
I do, because we have a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old, and they're very smart children, but we always get them to take ownership of their grades. And of course, we reward them whenever they get straight A's, or even if they get A's and B's, it's their work. We're not going to criticize them, but we always encourage them that they could do better. And so long as they did their best, that's all that matters. And they're going to get rewarded for whatever effort they put into it.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Victor, for having me. This was a good experience for me as well. My first time ever doing it, or I had to be honest with you, I'm not a techie, and I hadn't even heard of podcasting before.
Well,
am I aging myself?
You can say that you did your first podcast proudly.
That's right. I'm proud of myself.
All right, Liz. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll be continuing with you at another time when you join us again here at Latinos Who Thrive.
Excellent. I thank you for your program. I think it's going to be a big success.
Thank you.